Okay, so the Hangout says we're live. Let's see if we are live everywhere. If you guys want to say hi, then we'll know that you guys can see us. So I'm super excited to be here today. I'm here with two of my favorite people, Angel and Rebecca. You guys can wave. Hi. They're both two amazing Rails developers, and they don't only develop in Rails, and we'll talk about that, but they both have a lot of experience developing in Ruby on Rails. So I'm so excited to have you here at this webinar, and today we're going to be talking all about why Rails is an awesome framework, why it's really great for beginners, the role it plays in the tech community, and what you can really learn from learning Rails, and what it can help you do in terms of your goals and your career. So our goal in this webinar is to talk really openly and honestly about our own experiences learning to code, working in the tech industry, the different jobs that we've done, how we have used the skills that we've learned, the pitfalls, everything. We're going to be talking for about half an hour, and then we're really excited to field your guys' questions. And you really have two of the most amazing people here, myself not included, to answer your questions. So I really want you guys to start thinking about if you have any questions about what it's like to work, remotely, because we have experience doing that, what it's like to break into tech, what it's like to do computer science in an academic setting, the amazing wealth of knowledge that we have in these two ladies cannot be underestimated. So I really encourage you guys to think about some questions that you'd like to ask them. And otherwise, and then any advice we can give you. So by the end of this call, you're going to understand what Rails is, why you would want to learn it, why it's a really great framework to learn as a beginner, what it can do for you, who in the tech community is using it. We're going to be talking about what the life of a Rails developer is, what do they do day to day, and also, of course, most importantly, what it takes to become a Rails developer. What sort of time frame you're looking at, what's realistic, what kinds of things employers are going to want to see that you have experience with, and all of that fun stuff. And of course, we're going to be telling stories about all the cool things that you can do once you know Rails. So throughout this webinar, I'm going to ask you to comment. So please do that in the chat feature in this Google Hangout window, or you can do it in the Facebook comments below this video. If you aren't seeing the chat feature, you have to, there's a little thing that you have to click, which I think is like right below my finger, and it will pop open the Google Hangout in a second window, and you should see the chat feature on the right, and then you can actually upvote questions and stuff like that, so that can be a really fun way to see what else everyone else is asking. All right, so if you guys are all ready, so I guess just to set the stage a little bit before we cede the floor to Angel and Rebecca, I want you to think about whether or not you have been hearing about how amazing Ruby on Rails is, but maybe you don't know exactly what it is, or you don't really know exactly like how it's used or what it would be like if you were actually to use Rails. So I know that for myself personally, like I came into the tech scene when Rails was really, really hot and new, and it was like all the cool kids are doing it. And for a very long time, it was like, what is it? Like, what does it look like? Where do I see it? How do I know that I'm looking at it? And if you've ever wanted to sit down with a Rails developer and ask her your questions, and this is your chance. And if you are wondering maybe what you want to do first before you go ahead and learn Rails, those are great questions. So if any of these apply to you, I would love for you to start right now by leaving us a comment and letting us know, thinking about Rails, what brought you to this webinar, and why you're excited about learning more about it. So, okay, so I guess with that, I want to go ahead and cede the floor to Rebecca and Angel, and I've got some questions for them, and you guys are going to have some questions for them. And what I'd love to start, Rebecca and Angel, is if you guys could just talk about right here, right now, what is it that each one of you does, and how is Rails a part of it? So, Rebecca, if I can start with you, because I know you have some exciting stuff that you're up to right now.
Yeah. So currently, I'm an instructor at Dev Bootcamp, which is a 19-week Learn Ruby on Rails boot camp. So I do a lot of lecturing on Ruby and Sinatra and Active Record and databases, and then of course Rails. And I build curriculum and stuff like that. And then I'm actually about to make a transition to open the office of a well-known consulting company that I'm not sure I can say yet. So I'm just going to say that. But that's a really exciting opportunity to still keep coding, but also build community and build a team. And I'm really excited about it.
And the consulting company, which we will not name, which I know is super cool, is one that does a lot of work in Rails, right?
Yeah. That's probably the primarily work that they do, although things are sort of expanding out a little bit, which I'm sure we'll touch on a little bit later. And they definitely have made the name for themselves in the Ruby and Rails community.
And so, guys, how this applies to you is that this means that Rebecca has a ton of experience both knowing, beginners who break into the field and the process of learning and what that looks like, and then also now you're going to start to have a lot of experience on the other end, which is like, how do you hire people? What are you looking for? That kind of stuff. So.
And I have hired junior developers, a few in the past, so this will definitely be much more of that. But I do have some insight into that as well as working as a software developer for over 10 years and doing Rails the last, 4 or 5 years.
Cool. Can't wait to hear more. All right, Angel.
Yeah. So currently I'm an independent contractor, so I don't work full-time for any company.
Which means you basically do what you want when you want.
Yeah. But my primary client is a small startup in the educational software field. And I've been working with them for about the past year and a half, and I'm really just thrilled about the work that I'm doing there. It's Rails development.
Oh no! Where did Angel go? I was going to say too, one thing that's really cool about Angel is I know that she's coming to us right now. Well, she was coming to us, and hopefully she'll be back in a second, from Athens, Georgia. But I know that she was just out on the West Coast for 3 months. So it's a great example of how you can do your job from anywhere. And I know, Rebecca, you just made a big move.
Yeah, so I was living in New York for, I don't even remember, since 2006. What is that, 8 years, 7 years, 7.5, something like that, whatever.
I think so, yeah.
And I just moved to Chicago. And actually, I started my career in Chicago, and then I lived in St. Louis, but was still working for a company in Chicago. And so I've been able to move around a little bit, and work remotely for the same company sometimes, or just change jobs.
So tell us a little bit about how you got started in tech. Oh, Angel's back. Is Angel? Angel!
I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened.
No, it was just, we were all like, oh! So you were saying that you've been working for this educational software startup.
Right,
and
yeah.
I told everyone that you are coming to us from Athens, Georgia, and that you have just been traveling. So I was, you're a great example of somebody who's been able to have a lot of location independence while still working.
Yeah, I really love that about being a contractor. I like you probably told them, I was traveling for the past 2 months in different cities, and I was able to continue working while I was traveling. Along with that, there will be times, lately I've been working kind of a lot. So I'll start my day at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the morning, and continue working, with breaks on and off pretty much all day. But while I was traveling, I was kind of in a lull, contract-wise. So I was able to only work 3 or 4 hours a day and kind of enjoy my travels. And so it's great.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I mean, that's awesome if you're traveling. It's awesome if you have a family that you have to take care of, or if you have other obligations. There's a lot of flexibility. Mm-hmm. So I would love to hear from both of you guys sort of how you ended up where you are. Start at the very beginning, with preferably when your parents met, I think would be a good, just kidding. But it'd be great to hear how you guys got into tech, what interested in you in tech, and especially then how you started working in Rails.
Do you want me to start?
Yes.
Okay, well, my parents met. No, it's actually sort of relevant. My parents actually were both research scientists, and my mom has a PhD, and they met in 1970-something while doing their postdoc research at the Mayo Clinic. So in some ways, like science and engineering were always something that were present in my life. And I was always sort of like sciencey stuff and humanities and wasn't quite sure. I knew I didn't want to work at a lab and be a professor. I did okay at math, but I wasn't like, math is amazing. But I didn't really know what engineering was. So like I took like AP chemistry in high school, and I remember all of the like students who were mostly guys talking about how they were going to go and like get an engineering degree, and I was secretly like, what is that? And apparently my high school actually had computer science, but I had no idea. So, and I mean, looking back, I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember Angel Fire, but I used to do some crazy HTML and CSS up in there, so there was like a little bit of it. But basically, my first introduction to computer science was in college. It was like the height of Napster and stuff, and I was like, I like the internet. I'm going to take computer science. So I took Introduction to Computer Science, which was an introduction to the C programming language, which is like not relevant to the internet at all. There was like no building websites. I had no context for how what I was building became something that people actually used. If some of you have ever used the terminal, it was just like all terminal stuff, and I was like, well, this is great, but like I can't give this to my like mom to use, you know. But I did really like it, and I liked solving problems, so I continued taking classes, and then I sort of got to a point where I was like, I had declared a major in women and gender studies. I wanted to continue with that. I wanted a humanities degree because I liked that stuff. I was interested in it. I liked thinking critically and problem solving in that way as well. So the question was, did I also want to major in computer science or get a degree? And the big question for me was, what does it look like to be a developer? And I think a lot of women tend to have that question, and even young girls have that question more than young boys when they think about careers. And so,
like, what's a day in the life?
Yeah, what's a day in the life? What does this look like? Like, am I going to be able to have flexibility? Like, you know, all those sorts of questions that actually rarely, I think, we talk about because we have this image of, like, Mark Zuckerberg sitting in the basement in Harvard or whatever. And so I took a year off with, like, the goal of getting an internship or something. And I ended up sort of, like, someone that I had known in high school, her husband owned a consulting company. And the interview was basically like, do you know VB? And I said no, and he was like, great, learn it. So that was really awesome. So I kind of got lucky in some ways, but I think, you know, that always sort of comes along with a lot of work and preparation too. And so I started working for him, and we did a lot of work for nonprofits and government agencies, which was really amazing. I ended up transferring schools and went to school in St. Louis, where I finished my bachelor's in women and gender studies and then got a master's in computer science. But it was really through working, and I continued to work while I was in school, that I felt like this was something that was for me. To be honest, most of my academic experiences, it was great, but it was just not something that I was super interested in. Like, I wanted to build products for people, and I think it's changing, but there's definitely a difference between sort of academic computer science and research and things like that, and then software engineering as a profession. And I think, you know, with things like Skill Crush and other changes and the popularity of things like Ruby on Rails, we're sort of starting to figure out the conversation and what those differences are. But that's how I got started.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you really bring up, or what I think about when you're talking about this, is this question of, like, meaning. Like, what is, because the truth is, like, a lot of work is just at a computer, period, right? So in that way, what developers do versus what any other person does who has an office job, like, really isn't that different. But then the question is, well, what is it that you're doing, and does that have meaning? And I think that maybe we've all kind of, I can speak for myself, like, I know in high school, like, I did like math, but did math feel connected integrally to, like, what else I cared about in my life? Like, not necessarily. And I think that's a question that a lot of people, or like to me, I think that's a real stumbling block. It's like, okay, if I'm looking at the terminal all day, like, why? For what? Yeah. You know, and is it going to be something tangible that's going to, like, give me meaning and passion and excite me and get me out of bed in the morning? So, Angel, tell us, how did you
Yeah, well,
Find your way.
it's funny that you say that because I was a math major and I went on I went on to grad school to study math and I thought that I wanted to get a PhD and kind of after the first year I had this like realization that like I was thinking those things like who is this really going to help? You know, I'm studying these like kind of really arcane things and they have no you know applicability in the world. I mean, you can study math that's applicable, but I wasn't. So I kind of decided that I just didn't want to go that route. And I ended up just getting a master's degree and then kind of looking around for a job at that point. And I had done a lot of work with nonprofits, just volunteer work, and I'd taken a class in nonprofit organization management. And I happened to get a job with a software company that made software for nonprofits, doing just front end testing, so just like user testing. Um, and from there, I kind of expressed like a desire to learn to code, and they let me start doing automation testing, which is um, coding like coding to test. And so I was doing that, but I was like still like not really building things for users. I was like just writing code that like talks to machines, and it wasn't like quite what I was interested in. So I started doing a couple like side projects with web programming and JavaScript, and I found that like I really was interested in that. So I tried to get a job kind of doing more of that, and I did. And I also like at that time I learned some kind of PHP and some other open source stuff. And I was hearing about Rails and Ruby and tried to kind of teach myself a little bit. That only got me so far. So and then I heard about Sinatra, and I heard that that was like an easier kind of entry framework. So I was able to have like a little bit of success, with Sinatra, with some help from other developer friends. And that I think, I made a couple of like small resume projects with that, and that is what helped me get a job at a college where they had like this one massive Rails app, and that's when I like really learned Rails was at that college. I was there for about 2.5 years.
So what you're saying is you actually really learned on the job.
I did. Yeah, I took a couple computer science classes in college, but they were really entry level, and pretty much everything that I know and use today I learned on the job.
So Rebecca and Angel, I guess, I mean, it sounds like, Angel, with you, what's interesting is that it sounds like you kind of knew that Rails was the direction to go in, but what you really had learned was Sinatra, as far as, like, you obviously knew other things, too. But I guess my question is, so if I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, like, I'd like to break into tech, and I've been sort of, like, trying some different things, why is, going in the Rails direction a good idea?
Yeah, well, I think it's a good idea because there's a ton of work right now, first of all, and just not enough people to fill the jobs. So even just expressing an interest in Rails, I think, leads you in the right direction in terms of getting jobs. Also, it's just I think it still has that like sex appeal a little bit, that like everybody's still kind of like wanting to use it for their new idea, and so I think it's going to continue like growing and being popular for a while.
Yeah, Rebecca, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple reasons from my perspective. So I didn't start learning Rails. I learned other languages, and then I saw Rails, and I was like, this is amazing. Everything is so much easier.
Yeah.
Which is sort of one reason that I think Rails is a good direction to go in. I think that Ruby, the programming language that you learn and use as part of Rails, is a really sort of user-friendly language. It looks kind of like English. There's not a lot of semicolons and things like that can just feel confusing. And so I think as a language, it's like a fairly easy introduction. I think there are things like Sinatra that sort of like pave a really nice path. So I think like as an introductory sort of language and framework, it's really great. As a framework, it's very what we call opinionated. You might hear the term convention over configuration. But the bottom line is really like it forces you to use good practices. And you may not understand when you're first doing it why you're doing it, but it can kind of keep you from getting into bad habits. And there's a lot to sort of dig in about Rails that you can learn as you go forward. It feels kind of magical at first, and I think that's okay as long as you sort of stay curious about it and try not to get super overwhelmed. I also think Rails is an open source language, or Ruby is open source, and Rails is open source as well. And there's a number of other things, but this has been a really big transition, and we're seeing even like United States government and large organizations moving towards open source, which means that the source code for how Rails is made is not under copyright. It's available to anybody. If you've taken some Skill Crush courses, you might have used Git and GitHub, so that's where it's available. And the nice thing about this is that like you can go and look at the like what exactly the Rails programmers are doing. It might feel overwhelming and scary, but you can. But it also means there's this big community of people who are like all about sharing. And there's a lot of tutorials and just resources available for getting help. And I think that that's really special about, I think the community is really special about Ruby and Rails. And it's sort of like a good balance between having community, but also really caring about doing things well and quality and best practices and how can we make this better and make ourselves better. So I think that's really helpful for beginners, which is not to say there aren't some people who are kind of assholes, but the other thing is I think we're kind of at a really interesting point with Rails. So a number of years ago it was like the new hotness, and I think Angel's right, it's still kind of sexy. But the nice thing about it is that also bigger organizations and like the government are starting to use it. And what that means is that those are often the places who hire the most sort of junior people because they have the resources for mentorship. And so I think that that presents like a really huge opportunity. There are these places and people that need software developers. They're recognizing these new tools, and they already have the resources for like training programs for people out of college and all that stuff. So it makes sense that they start sort of redirecting those into, you know, sort of non-traditional paths. And then I also think there's always like freelance and remote is like very welcome, and there's a lot of flexibility around programming in general, and Rails in particular. The creator of Rails, like everyone in his company works remotely. He was like in Denmark when he created it, working with a company in Chicago. So there's definitely a lot of conversations about that, which I think is a really nice way to start and gives people flexibility to just like get their foot in the door on some level.
Yeah, and I mean, I think also, you know, what Angel is talking about is that there's a lot of work and not a lot of people, and that lends itself to you being able to ask for things like remote work. I guess I just want to pause for a second on this, or like I want to dig a little bit deeper into this process, because you're talking about this community and how it's so big, and I know what you're talking about, but I think for people who are not in the inner circle, it can just feel like this like impenetrable. It's like, what does that process look like exactly? And Angel, you touched on this in terms of like you were saying that you started with Sinatra and then you were able to get this job, but can we just talk a little bit more, like what, like in, you know, how does that work? Like how do you go from being like, I am on this webinar trying to like figure out what makes sense of this whole thing, to like actually making real progress in terms of meeting people, being a part of the community, and getting that job?
Yeah, I think user group meetings and meetups, you know, if you have like a Ruby users group or a Ruby meetup or a Rails meetup in your town, or even just a tech meetup in your town, definitely go and just meet the other developers there. I think that Ruby just has a really great kind of underlying culture of people who want to help and who want to, you know, just who are just really great people. So I would just encourage you to go and meet other people that are doing it, and you know, try some tutorials on your own. definitely Skill Crush is very helpful way to go. So yeah.
Yeah, and then for you, like, did you know the people who hired you? Like, how did you make that connection?
I didn't. I just kind of saw the job ad and applied and went in and had the interview and kind of told them about what I did know, and was honest about the fact that I didn't know Rails and that I was really interested in learning and that I had tried to, kind of do some on my own already. And I guess, that was good enough.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from my perspective as somebody who's hiring people, like, things change so fast that you're always having to learn new stuff. So it's you know what I mean? So like, I wouldn't shy away from, especially if I talk to someone who's obviously intelligent, who's like, also somebody who's gone out and worked on learning something on their own that's like pretty far outside of what they had done in the past is very impressive. And even a little bit of mastery is very impressive. And I feel like it's like even having like a little bit to show for yourself is actually often the hardest thing, because it's like getting over that initial hump is the biggest challenge. And then after that, like, if I stick you on a Rails team with a bunch of really advanced Rails developers, like, you'll have to work hard, but
you're going to learn for sure.
Yeah.
And I would also add that I think a lot of it isn't even sometimes the technical hump. It's like an emotional hump, in the sense that
feelings.
Yeah, feelings. It's always about feelings.
It always is.
Let them tell you otherwise. Software problems are always people problems.
Yes.
I think that one of the things about being a developer is that you just start to feel comfortable feeling uncomfortable. Everything changes so quickly. You might have done something like 2 weeks ago that totally worked, and then you try to do the exact same thing in a different project and everything explodes and you can't like figure it out. So I think part of that is just getting over this idea that like you have to know everything, because you're never going to know everything, and a belief in the fact that you can learn this. And I really think that everybody could learn it.
If that's what they want to do.
If that's what they want to do. If you have the motivation and you're interested, I think you can learn it. And I think some people approach that from different places. Some people are like, I want to build a thing, so I'm going to learn it in order to do that. I tend to be a little more like that. I have to give myself projects to learn new things. And other people are like, I'm just curious about this new language. But I also think there's also like the something that Dev Bootcamp talks about is exposing your ignorance. And I think that one of the things about the tech community, and I think this tends to be harder for women than it is for men, is that people will write tutorials like, I wrote this thing and it totally broke and here's how I fixed it. And you feel silly because you're like, oh, there's 7 other tutorials about this, or there's or like, this is so stupid that I couldn't figure this out. But actually, stuff like that is really helpful, and I think one way to sort of feel less overwhelmed, I think meetups are awesome, but also like start a blog. There's like WordPress or Tumblr or Medium or whatever, and start like writing about your path and your challenges. And one, it makes you really visible to people, but also like the page, I don't blog that much, but the pages that get the biggest hits on my blog are like things I wrote like 6 years ago about how like I couldn't figure out how to get this one thing installed, or like one of them is like the 0.08 version of something that's now in like its 5th version, and people are still coming to it to try to figure out this one thing that it's not a super advanced tutorial. It's like, how do you get this to work on the internet? And those are the things that I'm like, oh, thank you so much. I've been Googling for this, So sometimes it's like the small things, or like you'll see as you go through tutorials, like you'll see 5 different tutorials on the same thing, and like 4 of those are not going to click with you, and then 1 will. And so describing it differently and from your perspective, I think, is really important. The other thing is like developers are really active on Twitter, and so I'd recommend creating a Twitter account and just creating like a Twitter list of like 20 developers that you've heard of, or you find, or you like Google search around. If you search like Ruby tutorials or Rails tutorials, you'll start to find people and their blogs. You can subscribe to their blog feed, and just feel okay that you're not going to always understand what they're talking about, but you're just starting to get like the conversations that are being had and those words in your head. And I think that can help overcome some of the like sort of intimidation. And then I think if you start to participate, people in general will respond well to that.
I think those are such good points. So, I mean, so exposure, just sort of like letting it all flow over you. There's a really great newsletter that I love, rubyweekly.com. I think it's just rubyweekly.com that I subscribe to. And, you know, some of the stuff I look at and I'm like, I have no idea what they're talking about. And then other stuff, you know, but you kind of start to get a sense for like, yeah, what's the community talking about? What's the hot new Ruby gem, et cetera, et cetera. I really like what you're saying, though, too, about the blog posts, because I think the thing is that what's so scary as a beginner and what you don't have perspective on when you're starting out is that you're like, but this will expose that I don't know what I'm doing with Ruby or Rails or whatever. But the thing is that what it does is it demonstrates your problem-solving skills. Mm-hmm. And that's really the most important skill.
Absolutely.
Angel, yeah.
Sorry.
No, I was going to say, what I'd love to talk about is what are some projects that you guys have worked on? I mean, Angel, I know that you've worked on this big education. Mm-hmm. Is it in Rails, the app that you're working on?
It is, yeah.
Okay, so I mean, you don't have to talk specifically about that, but just like in general, like what are some cool things that you've done with Rails? Where have you really enjoyed working on it?
Yeah, well, I am proud of this project, so I'll tell you about it. Awesome. Yeah, so the company that I work for, they make what they call interactive case studies for high school biology classrooms. So basically the students are kind of like playing the role of a veterinarian or a physician, and they get like a sick animal or a sick patient or something, and they're it's like a video game that they're playing. It's a desktop application, a video game kind of thing that they're playing, and they're trying to figure out like sort of house style, like what's wrong with the patient, you know, and they're like learning about these biology concepts along the way. And the Rails app that I work on provides the API, which is you know, the interface for the video games to take in the students' answers and present them to a teacher in a web interface. Okay. And so it's kind of like an in-class thing. The students are playing through this video game, and the teacher is, you know, at his or her desk and watching the answers come in real time. So, you know, if the teacher sees that a student is answering in a way that kind of shows that they have some misconception about a concept, the teacher can go over and, you know, correct that misconception right away, and it provides like an immediate, you know, a way for them to give like immediate feedback, which is crucial in like the learning process. So it's a real small startup, but I've been working with them for, you know, the past year and a half, and I've like watched it grow from nothing to like being in like 40 plus schools now, and like all the teachers love it and the kids love it, and it just feels really good to be working on something that's having such a meaningful impact.
That's awesome. How about you, Rebecca? What's give us something juicy here.
Give you something juicy. Well, I've worked on an online dating app. I've also worked on educational software, and also as part of that, I built the prototype and then was the team lead for building an application for couples. It was like curated collections of dates, which was really cool. Building a Rails app, building a dating app is definitely really interesting. Like, maybe it doesn't sound that interesting, but there's a lot of cool technical challenges. But there's also some people challenges in the sense that I don't know, some people are gross, and I guess I just wouldn't have thought of that. But there's definitely a level of oversight. So something that people a lot of times don't think about is all these web applications you use. They also have a back office system, like an admin system that people internally, customer service has to use, or people are looking at, the pictures people post to make sure they're not super weird and inappropriate, or stuff like that. And which is just kind of a funny example, but there's a variety of things. I worked for an online tutoring site, and they would review tutoring sessions and stuff like that. And so there's really everything that you see, you're just seeing the little knob, and there's a whole room behind it of stuff that you can work on, and that can be if you care a lot about education, that can be perfect. But also if you have a background in marketing or customer service or accounting or whatever, there are applications that people are building as part of whatever you're seeing, whether it's Google or Dropbox or Facebook, that people are creating, and you can like be a part of that. And I think it's a really cool way to sort of like combine, especially people with a lot of interests. I have a lot of interests, so I always think that's fun to like be a part of business and products and like customers and talk to marketing and customer service. And sorry, I got a little off topic on that one.
No, not at all. Are you guys ready to field some questions?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we have one here. It's got the most upvotes, so I'm going to pick it first. And I actually, it looks like the characters are in Chinese, so I actually think I know who this is. But anyways, I'll just go ahead and ask for a question, which is, I have front-end skills with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and I'm taking the Ruby Blueprint starting Monday. So she's going to be enrolled. That's awesome. But I'm wondering, from a career success standpoint, is it better move to learn Ruby on Rails really in depth versus the other languages? So I guess I'm not 100% sure what other languages she's thinking about, but I guess maybe you can just talk about the career prospects of somebody who learns Ruby on Rails really in depth.
I think Angel mentioned PHP, and I've worked in other languages like .NET and Java. Ruby developers really are in demand, which often means that they make more money. So that's one nice thing about it. I also think, like, on some level, it doesn't matter. Like we've mentioned, it's really about like learning how to learn technology and like what are the learning strategies, how do you debug things, like how do you solve those problems and like think in that way. And you'll get that from learning any language. I think that Ruby and Ruby on Rails is just an easier place to start. It's a little bit more accessible for all the reasons that we've mentioned. And then I think there's just a lot of job prospects at the end, and I think there's good opportunities for people who are coming in. Also, like, because Rails is relatively new, like a lot of the developers I know don't have a degree in computer science at all. I know people who don't have college degrees at all who like work as Rails developers. So it's a lot more about showing your skill than like having these credentials, which is also like a really nice thing to do. As a front-end developer, I think because Ruby on Rails is what we call a full stack framework, which is that it has like front-end HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then you do Ruby, and you can even expand into the database and other things like that. It can be a nice way to use the skills you have while still learning something else, and also for people who don't have many skills, or many skills in terms of like HTML, CSS languages, it can be a nice way to sort of determine, do you like doing all of it? Do you like mostly the front end? Do you like the back end? And so that can be helpful, and that's not always true in web frameworks.
Yeah, I know. I know there was a program here in New York recently where they took people who did not have college degrees and taught them Rails, and then the average salary that they started with, which they got right after the program, was $70,000. So that was really, really amazing. And granted, those are New York prices and all of that, but I thought that was really impressive. I have a question, and I think actually that this is the third one for you, Angel, and the question is, when is a good time for a self-taught developer to start seeking work as a Ruby on Rails developer?
I would say as soon as you can.
I'm like, yesterday.
Yeah, really. Like that's one of the things that I hear a lot from new developers is they just don't feel ready. They don't feel ready. They don't feel ready. And really, you're going to do most of your learning, regardless of how much you prepare, you're going to do most of your learning on the job anyway. So just be bold and, be brave, and just go ahead and just start looking for jobs. Start networking and start applying for jobs. Even if you feel like, no, I really don't know anything, you probably do.
So I know, yeah, and I think this speaks to something that, Rebecca, you talk about a lot, which is imposter syndrome. And I want to give you a chance to talk about Brightspeed Code and all of the work that you do in that. But I just want to, share a personal story for myself, which is that I totally understand this feeling of not feeling ready. I pretty much don't feel ready for everything I do at all times. But it was funny for me because I feel like you have this sense of will there be this moment where I feel like I've got this, like I know what I'm doing? And I did have a moment where I was like, hey, I really know how to program. But the irony of it was that it was like 4 years after I started learning to program. I was like building Skill Crush by that point. I mean, it's like the point at which I finally felt it was so far beyond the point at which, like, I think by any objective measure I could reasonably call myself a developer. And I felt like that was, and it was great to feel that feeling, but like it doesn't mean I feel like it all the time. It was like a brief moment. And I think but it really speaks to how like your feeling about that is so not connected to reality, if does that, Rebecca?
Yeah, so what
Do you feel like a developer? You're only leading this new consulting company.
Yeah, which we can mention, and it's Hotspot, which you may hear about, which has a lot of Rails gems that, like, as you go through, you'll probably end up using. And it's a really great company, and I'm super excited. But
we're so excited for you.
Thank you. Yes and no. Like, it's funny. Like, there definitely was. I've had those moments where I'm like, I know what I'm doing. Like, I can do this. But the problem is, like, you have that moment, and then, like, you have the next thing, and then the next thing you're doing is like a little step above that, and you're like, oh crap, I have no idea what I'm doing. So it definitely oscillates, and it's also something like I'm working on. So as Autumn mentioned, I run Right Speak Code, which is an organization that works with women engineers to teach like thought leadership, conference speaking, and open source contributing. But the like start of everything we do is always about this idea of imposter syndrome, and the idea that people, even there's like this woman who's the president of Harvey Mudd Engineering College, and
Maria Claw, yeah,
and she's like worked at like head up a bunch of like your science departments, I think like Harvard or Princeton or something, and now she's the president of Harvey Mudd, which is a really well-respected engineering school in California. And she talks about having imposter syndrome, being like, what am I doing? I don't deserve to be here. And so I think it's like the recognition that that's what's happening to you, and then can help like be like, okay, I'm feeling like this, but this doesn't mean that it's actually the case. And so that's one of the things that we start with, because I think I mentioned earlier, like, yeah, there are the technical challenges, but I actually think learning to code is like much more of an emotional challenge in a lot of ways for most people. I just think like the process of like feeling like you're failing constantly because your code isn't working is just not something that like we're trained to handle very well, like just in general in our society. But I kind of think it's a really good life lesson in a lot of ways. Like, you definitely learn to like feel comfortable feeling uncomfortable, and letting things go, because you build a web app and then people use it and you're like, oh, that's not how I thought that was going to happen. So yeah, I think that that's really a big challenge.
So it's interesting, Angel, I want to ask you about your experience going from math into computer science and engineering in this way, because I know one of the reasons why I've had perspective on this idea of like sort of just keeping at it until you fail is because my dad's actually a math professor, and I feel like this is something that's also very much in the culture of math, but isn't really in the culture of everything else. Like, do you feel like you were maybe more prepared for working in tech because of that?
Well, I can't say that exactly, because
right.
I have struggled I have struggled with this, a lot, this imposter syndrome, and there have been a few times when I've seriously considered just leaving tech, just because I thought, well, I don't know if I'm really, cut out for this, or, that sort of thing. I've had those thoughts a lot. And actually, one of the things that I wanted to mention is that I think that the most destructive thing, for a career is lack of self-compassion. I think like self-compassion is like the most important thing that you can, most important skill, basically, that you can cultivate in terms of benefit for your career, because beating yourself up because you don't know how to do something or because you made a mistake, that negative self-talk is toxic and has a tendency to snowball, and it'll deplete your confidence and your energy and your motivation, and that's just gonna, like, you'll be like, why go on, So yeah, I think that learning to just be compassionate with yourself and understand that everybody goes through this and everybody makes mistakes and everybody takes time to learn,
I mean,
And
listen, guys, this is like, we've got Angel and Rebecca on here who are so smart and so successful, and they struggle with this. Sorry, I
yeah,
didn't mean to cut you off. Yeah, exactly.
One
yeah,
exercise that I really love with that is like if you think about what you're saying to yourself and like what would you say to your best friend? Because you would never say the things that you say to yourself to your best friend.
right.
And so I'm always like, okay, this is not what I would say to my best friend. Let's try this again.
Yes. I read a really good thing, and it was actually from a woman who I think works in like video games or something. So this is like a perfect thing for her to say. But she was basically like, the quote is something like, "Oh, did life just get harder? Congratulations, you just leveled up." And so like whenever like stuff's really hard with my business or with code or anything I'm doing, I'm like, that's right. It's all like it's just because like I'm now on a harder level. And that's how I make myself feel better and keep going. So we actually have a lot of questions about sort of the process of learning Rails and like what's the best way to do it. And I know, of course, there's lots of different ways, but since you guys are in the business of teaching people, and I am too, I'd love to get your thoughts about what what you recommend. So we have a question here that is whether or not, hold on one second, I just found it. Give me one second. The question is basically whether you should learn Ruby before you learn Rails. Angela,
Yeah.
you must have learned Ruby before you learned Rails.
Yes. Well, I kind of tried to do it at the same time, which, as I mentioned before, didn't really go smoothly at first, because it's kind of hard to sort of parse out like what's part of Rails and what's Ruby, and so I think that one of the things that really helped me when I first got the job at the college where they had this big Rails app and they were doing everything in Ruby and PHP was that I started learning Ruby itself just for its own sake, and I was like kind of writing little scripts and things in Ruby, and that helped me tremendously. So I would say yes, that like I think you can kind of learn them sort of simultaneously, but I think it's important to focus on learning Ruby specifically.
Rebecca, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I think that you need some basis in Ruby, and I think that's mostly like you need to know how to write a loop, write a method, write a class. I think those are the basic things. It's always like with learning, I think people come at it with sort of different things that they find motivating. So some people will feel like, okay, I have to get really far in Ruby before I can even start Rails. And if you think that, you probably need to get less far than you think. And some people would be like, but I don't want to write stuff in the terminal, and you probably need to spend a little more time with Ruby than you think. So I think there's always that balance between like making the work meaningful, like as we talked about earlier, but then also having the foundation to actually move forward. So I think if you know that you want to learn Rails, like I definitely think you need at least some like basic understanding of Ruby and how to run commands and all that stuff. I agree with Angel. I just think it's really hard to learn them both simultaneously. You don't create good mental models of what you're doing because it's hard to distinguish between what's Ruby and what's Rails.
Yeah. I think this, just to even further complicate the discussion right now, we have this great question from one of our users or one of our webinar audience members, and it's so she says that she's a junior in graphic design, and she's wondering if employers like a designer who can also do Ruby on Rails, or would it be overreaching? And then she's wondering, should she combine it with AngularJS and Node.js? And I know that, this is totally this problem that's so hard when you're a beginner because you're like Rails, Angular, Node, whatever, And Rebecca, you were talking about how Rails is a full stack framework. And I know, Angel, that you've also worked a lot with JavaScript frameworks. Can you guys talk a little bit about where do those come in? Do you also need to know those? Like when should you learn them? How does it all fit together?
Well, I kind of have a thought about this specifically because for a long time when I was starting out, I was kind of trying to learn everything. I was like, okay, this new thing came out, I need to learn this. This new thing came out, I need to learn this. This new thing came out, I need to learn this. And I was kind of feeling guilty for not like spending my weekends learning all the new stuff that was coming out, and I was burning myself out. And so I would say, yeah, if you're interested and you're motivated and you want to learn things, the new things that are coming out, then definitely try and go for it. But at the same time, I'll say again that most of the learning that you're going to do on the job. I would say focus on what you need to know. Like, so if you get a job and the job, requires you to learn Node or to learn Angular, then at that point focus on those things and don't, worry about learning everything else in addition to that. Don't drive yourself crazy trying to learn everything all the time.
I would agree with that. I would also say, first of all, I love designers who learn how to develop because I kind of suck at design, and designers are in really high demand, and if you're a designer who has a good understanding of how web applications work, you're in even higher demand because, as you may know, the transition from print design to web design is actually much harder than it appears. We have all these different devices, especially with iPhones and iPads and blah, blah, blah now. And so there's a lot of complexity around solving problems with design. And I think in tech in general, we're putting a lot more value on that, and I think that's awesome. I think that whether you should learn Rails or Node or Angular really depends on what you want. I agree with Angel, you 100% learn most of what you want on a job. And so if there's a job that you're really shooting for, you can use that to decide where to go. But I think if you're just kind of I just want to explore to kind of see what I want, I think there's different things. So Rails sort of is a really nice, I think, introduction to learning about programming in general, and also sort of the process of building web applications. As a designer, if you want to kind of stay focused on more front-end and interaction, then obviously for all of these you need to know HTML and CSS and eventually a little bit of JavaScript. But if you want to sort of stay with design and front-end and you kind of know that, and you know enough to know that's what you want, then I think, first of all, for both Node and Angular, like we said with Ruby, you need to learn JavaScript first. I would say JavaScript is a much harder language to learn in a lot of ways. Some ways it's funner because you can use it in the browser and it does stuff, but it's definitely there's lots of semicolons and parentheses and can be very confusing. But Angular, and you might hear about Ember or Backbone, those are front-end frameworks. So the goal of that is to basically be on a single page and make it really interactive without having the user to wait for the page to reload and all of that sort of stuff. So if you really like that kind of stuff, and maybe you can take a look at the websites that you like. If you go into, if you use Chrome, you can right-click and say Inspect Element. And if you aren't too scared and you scroll through those elements and click through, you can kind of see what they're using sometimes. And you can also Google it. A lot of times what technology companies use is available on the internet because they talk about it. So you can take a look at sites that you like and try to figure out what technologies they're using and then use that to determine what you want. But stuff like Angular is really a front-end framework. Node is a back-end framework. So it's the back-end half. It's very in the terminal. You'll connect it with some HTML, but there's a lot less front-end web browser-y kind of stuff. So again, I think it goes back to where your interests lie or where you want to stretch yourself. So if you feel I'm a designer, I know some front-end stuff, I want to learn more about the back-end, and you know some JavaScript, maybe Node makes sense. If you're I'm a designer and I don't really know, and I want to try it all, maybe Rails makes more sense. If you're a designer and you're I really like front-end and I like designing really cool experiences, then Angular might make a lot of sense for you. Hopefully that was helpful. It's kind of a complicated question, but definitely pick one and move towards that until someone's paying you to learn something else.
Yeah, I think the thing to remember is that it's like you want to kind of get yourself in a situation as quickly as possible where you're actually, like you said, like using it in a practical application. Because I think it's like the danger you have with kind of learning to code and this whole like online and taking classes and stuff is that you can kind of get stuck in the quagmire of like learning and thinking about it and not doing.
For sure.
So we have one question really quickly here about, and this is kind of outside the topic of what we've been talking about, but it is about Ruby and Rails versus Python and Django. And I'm just interested if you guys, you know, like I'd love to hear from you, Angel. Like, did you think about learning Python? What's your guys' impression on, you know, is it easier to get a job as a Python developer or?
Yeah, I say that there are, you know, there's starting to be more jobs that I'm seeing anyway in Python and Django. I don't have a whole lot of experience with Python. I've looked at it a little bit, programmed with it a little bit, and you know, I like that it looks a lot like Ruby and that it's real readable and very low syntax. But when I started learning Ruby, like I was coming from .NET and Java and PHP. And so when I started learning Ruby, it was like, oh, this feels so good. It was like, you know, it was very enjoyable to learn to program again. So I'm not sure how Python compares in that regard. What else? I think maybe that's it for me.
I think we're a biased group to ask.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We're like, Python, what is that?
I think that Ruby is a little bit easier to learn than Python, but Python isn't difficult to learn. I would say the Python community is a really welcoming community, and there's a lot of work being done to like sort of welcome beginners and be really supportive. I think the downside is that there's always kind of a balance between sort of like consensus and like dictatorship at the extreme. And I think Python is like very on the consensus based and Ruby's a little bit more in the middle. And the nice thing about being in the middle is that there are sort of like decisions get made and things get moved forward and they're sort of like, this is the good thing now. And sometimes that can be easier to find in the Ruby world than it is in the Python world because there's just like a lot more voices and there's sort of less of sort of some figureheads that make that decision. So that's sort of like a good and bad, and that's a little bit of my outsider perspective because I'm not as involved in Python. I would also say that a lot of the people I know who learned Python and Django ended up getting jobs with Rails, which is fine. I think they're really similar. Django was originally really inspired by Rails. I think it's taken its own turns, which is great. So I think like you can't necessarily go wrong learning one or the other. Obviously, we think there's some advantages to Ruby and Rails. I will say if you're interested in anything sort of related to science and math and that sort of stuff, Python is in general a much better language for that. It tends to be used in academia way more than Ruby for a number of reasons. So there's some cool stuff that's happening around Python with that. So if you have an interest in that, it might make sense to do Python because, you know, if you can come up with a problem that you have, there just might be more resources for figuring those things out and then using Django to sort of present whatever work that you do.
Yes, yeah. My limited impression, and granted I'm not the most knowledgeable person about Python, is that it tends to be, like the people I know who are using it the most are in academia or in journalism and doing data work, stuff like that, stuff that's a little bit more scientific. So we're going to wrap up, but before we wrap up, I wanted to really quickly, we have a couple of questions which are specific to the Rails Blueprint, so for any of you guys out there who are thinking about coming and joining us for the Rails Blueprint, and Rebecca and Angel are helping us put together the Rails Blueprint. Could you guys talk a little bit about, you know, what people, like, so I've actually had this a couple times now, this question of people asking what sorts of projects am I going to do, what kind of work will I be able to present that I have accomplished after I do the Blueprint. So Rebecca, I'll let you take this one.
Yeah, okay. So, well, you'll start with Ruby, and there's a couple of fun, like, terminal apps, and I don't know how specific you want us to get Ada. But then we're going to take some of that and we're going to build it into a web application in Sinatra, some fun like numerology and stuff like that. And then we're going to build another web application having to do with words. We're still nailing all the details down. And then we'll have a Rails app that we'll sort of build on top of. It's going to have some Pinterest inspiration. So we're still like working out all the code and the exact challenges, but that's the general gist. It should be fun and it should be sort of have some meaning in general, hopefully. So yeah, so that's the plan. And you'll also learn a little bit about data and storing data and all that stuff, which is actually a big part of web applications.
Yeah, so our goal is really to give everyone the experience of creating a web application that's interactive, where you kind of do all that stuff, where you create things, and like, I don't know, it's like, how do you describe CRUD without saying CRUD?
Yeah, where you create something, you edit it, you delete it, you see a list of it.
Exactly. And then also, you know, I'm really excited about sort of all the computational thinking stuff and the spell checking and the thinking about, you know, yeah, how do you build a web app that's not about creating and deleting stuff necessarily, but sort of where you create a web app that kind of like, you know, is smart and can think about stuff and analyze. And
yeah, so we're going to throw in some, there's a big buzzword in tech education right now, computational thinking, that Google is all about, which sort of breaks down the ways that programmers think a little bit differently. You know, you'll sometimes hear like the way programmers think, and like a lot of times they think that's total bullshit what they're talking about. But I have learned over the years that I do think that I think about problems a little bit differently now than I did before, and then people who haven't experienced programming. So some of it will be more sneaky, and some of it will be like, this is what we're doing, and learning how to like solve your errors and start to think about how do you, when you want to learn Angular, like take that next step, and hopefully this will be an introduction to that in general.
Angel, is there anything you're excited about the Rails Blueprint that you want to share?
I'm just getting started on the project, so I've got a little catching up to do. But yeah, I think it's cool to, you know, that you'll be like developing a sort of a console-based app first and then making it a web application. I think that's really going to be a lot of fun. So.
Absolutely. So if you guys have any questions, the class starts on Monday. If you have any questions at all, please shoot us an email, hello@skillcrush. If you have questions for Rebecca and Angel, you can send them to hello@skillcrush, and we will make sure that they get them. Yeah, we are so happy that you joined us for this webinar. I know there's a lot more questions. We're happy to field the questions after the fact. And otherwise, I just hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your Friday afternoon and a good weekend. And Rebecca, you want to tell everyone where they can go to learn more about Brightspeak Code?
Yes, I do. www.brightspeakcode.com. We have a national conference coming up. It's 3 days in New York City. It's going to be totally amazing. Our definition for being a woman developer is that you identify as a woman and you have written a line of any code, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Ruby, Python, PHP, and you can tell us what it does.
Awesome.
So we have a low bar, and we've had students and beginners all the way up to people with like 15 years of experience, and it's like a really amazing environment to like learn and feel empowered and excited, and particularly around some of the stuff we talked about in terms of engaging with the tech community.
It's a great place to get started, you might say. All right, have a good one. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.